My name's John. I was a professional tarot reader for 3 years. I did a tarot magazine, and I now I work with history stuff. I write about sort of the modern medieval history, specialising in history, sort of magic and the witch trials. But my big thing of tarot is kind of the more hermetic side of tarot. So I've got a really big interest in tarot and Qabalah, tarot and kind of the particular form of Christianized Greek philosophy, where the understanding of the elements and all that stuff. I mean, I think last month you had Henry talking about some stuff as well, wasn't it? Yes. Tarot and the elements?
Yeah,
that's it. It should have been me last month. I really do apologise. My mum had to have an operation, and so I had to flee back to Wales. Now, tarot and Qabalah, as I was kind of going on about when I first came in, this goes back right to the beginning of the idea of tarot as a fortune-telling thing. If we go back, to 1781, one of the first things on tarot as a divination tool is this guy, Comte de Qabalah, a French kind of philosopher and thinker, writing in his big book. It's a multi-volume set of all his philosophy and ideas, just one little pamphlet on marrying up the tarot cards, which people have been theorizing about because they've got all this crazy symbolism. I mean, even for people at the time, the symbolism was quite sort of deep and interesting and crazy. Characters like death, characters like the hanged man, like the pigbess, etc. People have already been thinking about the symbolism of these things. And so de Qabalah marries it up with a particular Hebrew holy book, the Sefer Yetzirah. Now, the Sefer Yetzirah, as I say, it's about a 9th or 10th century book, and it is about a thing called the Tree of Life, and that's kind of their model of all existence. Now, I'm going to teach it as a very hierarchical thing that has a beginning, a middle, and an end, but that's actually a very inaccurate way to think of it. The Sephirah on the Tree of Life, the translation for that is numbers or emanations. And although it has a certain shape, which is conveniently but not as big as I'd like on the front of the book about it, it's this kind of matrixy, kind of almost diamond shape. Now, it has this shape, but it's much more a thing that kind of where every single sphere is coexisting at once. Every single sphere is kind of happening everywhere in the universe at once. It has different worlds within it, and the chain of these shapes themselves form different worlds, but we'll talk about that in much more detail. Now, we're already in little groups, which I quite like. Now, you, my dear, could I maybe suggest you pop over to this side? Just as, hang on, 1, 2, 3, kind of 4, bam, that makes it work for me. Now,
you need buzzers as well.
Oh yeah. Oh no, everybody's going to get a turn. Now, what I would like is, if one person at each table can get a tarot deck and just do me one thing, because I'm going to talk a tiny little bit more, and while I'm doing that, hopefully, I'll get everybody just take out all the pick cards. So you know the number cards? Take them out and
minors, yeah.
just
And
that's
chords
it.
as well.
Sorry?
And chords as well.
No, get the chords. They're dead to us. Just the pips. Take the pips and organise them for me as all of the aces, all of the twos, all the threes, all the fours, etc. Just in a pile. I'm sorry, I'm sick. I really apologise. I should have done this while I was gabbing on ages ago. In fact, that was my intention. It just didn't happen that way. Now, there we go. And ideally, what I'm going to try to do is you'll have all your pips in your 10 little piles, and then we'll work from there. Because I'll show you how to.
No royals.
No royals. That's a different one. Now, the other thing is, now the Tree of Life, it has its 10 emanations, and they are linked by these 22 paths. And the 22 paths do correspond to the court cards, but that is a subject where, if I start on that, we will be here tomorrow. And so, this one I will limit to just about the pick cards. Now,
Yeah, no, those.
that's it.
Yeah.
That's it. I only need one deck done this for each table, by the way. You don't all need to do it. I only need one deck like this for each table. Yeah, only one deck for each table, because I'm going to get in a few minutes you all to clear the tables off and put these out in a pretty pattern. But we'll get it one deck for each table. Now,
Yeah.
last deck.
Oh, it doesn't matter. I've done it now.
Yeah, that's alright.
That's pretty good.
Now,
Doesn't matter.
Which is that? And I haven't seen it. There's two of them. They've had it back.
so, as I mentioned, the tarot exists in 4 worlds. Now,
No, I haven't just
this matrix of reality, this tree of life, the best way I ever heard of it explained to me was the idea that if you imagine a universe, before anything we know, that is God. And in this universe, every single part of this universe is God. Everything that exists is God. And God is perfect, and God is all-knowing. And therefore, God, I'm afraid this is very churchy, but it is kind of, it's a religious system, so that's kind of the way it is. Now, and because God is perfect and all-knowing, God knows that he doesn't actually know anything. Because the thing is, if you are perfect and all-knowing and you're the only thing in the universe, you can never actually have anything happen to you that you can orchestrate. That can never happen. You can never have a surprise if you are the ultimate and only thing in the universe. And therefore, he has a plan. God contracts. He clears a little space within creation, and he just pierces his side. And this tiny amount of energy leaks out. And that energy falls to Earth. And if you imagine a hot spark falling to Earth and then cooling, and then dropping to Earth as like a tiny little curl of metal, then that is kind of the idea of the progression of energy through the tree of life. It goes from its most white-hot potential right on down to the earthiest creation of me standing in a pub talking to you guys. And that is basically the whole thing of tarot and the Qabalah, because that is life. Life has its very highest, most theoretical kind of angles, and then it has this, and it has, it has even lower than this. So that is the whole idea. And as this spark goes down, it goes through these 4 worlds of emanation, these 4 entire states of being. And if you've ever done anything, then this will be very familiar to you. I mean, for example, let's talk about sort of the stages of, let's talk about making a shirt. If you're a tailor making a shirt, then the very first idea is, well, I want a shirt. There is demand for a shirt. Oh, hello, come in. Do take a seat, it's okay. I've only just begun, I've been wittering on. It's all good.
Okay.
Now, you've got sort of the very first idea of making a shirt. And having the idea of making a shirt, that is a whole thing in and of itself. And then, well, what shirt am I going to make? What style is it going to be? What colour is it going to be? All of that. That's another whole world of ideas. Then you have the next bit of, well, I've decided I want, a grey sort of dress shirt with button-down collar. Well, now I have to actually take the chalk, and I have to take the bits of greaseproof paper, and I have to actually mark the damn thing out. And that is another world. And then comes the final bit, where you actually take your needle and thread and your scissors and you cut bits of cloth and you make an actual shirt. You cut them, you sew them, you turn them inside out. You realise that it's not as simple as drawing a shirt shape on a piece of paper, that if you don't get the proportions correct for clothing making, then it won't be a shirt. It'll be a sort of horrible thing that makes you look like a misshapen creature that grew up in a basement. And therefore, you have to do things slightly differently. And this is where we get these 4 worlds of emanation, these 4 entire states of being that are virtually unrecognisable to each other, but that are intrinsically linked. So we begin with the very top world. Now this top world corresponds to the suit of wands. Oh, by the way, are there any native Hebrew speakers in the room?
Any
Yeah, any Hebrew, thank God for that. I'm Welsh, I'm going to hurt this language really bad. No, I do try my best. I did a lecture where I had to read a Kabbalistic invocation from the 17th century, and there was this sound, it was in a theatre, and there was a sound from the auditorium, and it was the Jewish front of house manager laughing to
So, John, did you say that the first world is the world of wands?
Yes, it is.
Yes.
It corresponds to the seed of wands and the element of fire. Now, its name is the Axilla. And yes, there is a Z in there when it's written down. And this is the purely archetypal world. This is literally pure energy forms, quite different to anything even we would think of as an archetype. It's the world where, in sort of Hebrew mysticism, the names of God are native to this world. And so in sort of Hebrew mysticism, the names of God, they are the ultimate. They are the real kind of super-powered things that, you can't pronounce them, they will shake the earth. Lilith pronounces one of the names of God and is like shot straight into hell for that. So that's this power. It's pure energy and it's wild creative force. And it's one of the things we're going to see as we go down the tree of life, that in this you have the three pillars, and we're going to find all about this in a minute, but you have the middle pillar, which is kind of the ideal, and it's the hermaphroditic pillar, and it's neither male nor female. You have the male pillar, which is creative, and you have the female pillar, which is seen as destructive. But it's really important to understand that creativity isn't necessarily a good thing. And we must always understand, when we're talking about Qabalah, that the creativity of the sort of male pillar is it's like cancerous cells. Now, cancerous cells, the whole reason cancerous cells are bad is because they are this cell that won't die when it's supposed to. They don't die and they keep on trying to live and reproduce, and that is what cancer is. And that is the creative power of the Qabalah. It is this power that can bring life, but if it isn't checked, it becomes bad and becomes cancerous and becomes destructive by its very creative nature. And then on the other side you have the feminine pillar, which is destructive, but again, that is really important. Yes, unchecked it would eventually destroy everything, but you have to have a destructive force to match up with the creative force. If you don't have a catabolic force to match up with the anabolic force, that is, sort of wild growth and destruction, and, as I say, cancer. That is an incredibly necessary balance. Because I always feel terrible about characterising the female pillar as being all destructive and dark and kind of, it's very kind of, it's interesting to see where these kind of 10th century rabbis were in their heads, because they do talk about dark, unknowable, destructive wounds a lot. But it's a very important, necessary force of existence. So anyway, that's Axilla. Now the next world corresponds to the suit of cups. And this is the creative world. This world, so it's the world called Briah, B-R-I-A-H. And it acts like a sort of womb for the divine will, taking the raw energy of the world before, and then kind of defining it down into something a little more developed. So, for example, if the Axilla just screams, "I will create," then the Briatic world is the question, what will I create? And it's the idea that creating isn't a thing on its own, it must be something. Now, this world corresponds to the element of water, and it's kind of full of this mothering force and this dreamlike reflection of the suit of cups in tarot. Now, the next world down is the Yetzirah, the formative world. Oh, crumbs, that's okay, hang on, it's okay. Y-E-T Z-I-R-A-H.
And so, in the first world,
Axilla,
yeah.
which, that's A-T-Z-I-L-U-T-H.
Z-I-L-U-T-H.
Better be. That's okay, no, these spellings are quite interesting. Now, Now, the Yetzirah is the next world down. We're almost at the world of matter at this point. We're almost actually existing. This is the formative world. This is where the very base idea from Breyer, the response to the question, what will I create? So, for example, I know I want to make a dress. I don't know why clothes are in my mind so much today, but anyway. So, I want to make a dress. And it's where, finally, those impulses get turned into a mental image. And this is where we get something a lot like Plato had. He had these ideas of the perfect form. So somewhere, existing in the ether, there is the perfect form of a table, the perfect form of a chair, the perfect form of me, of you, of a man, a woman, anything. And this is much more that. And so, after the idea we have to make a dress, this is where the rules come in. And so this is the world that corresponds to the tarot suit of swords. And it's all about the element of air. And one of the interesting things is that, of course, Hebrew mysticism, well actually more than Hebrew mysticism, tarot itself is very Greek in its idea of the four elements. Because the Greeks actually they had more than four elements. Not only they had a concept of spirit, but more than that, for them, the element of air was two elements. You see, air for the ancient Greeks, it was ether and it was air. And when I spell air in that way, it's A-E-R. And ether is this very high spiritual element. And it's pure thought and pure intellect and pure mind. And it's this brilliant idea of sort of this pure creative force. It's the god Hermes inventing writing. It's all of this stuff. And then you have air with its A-E-R spelling. And that is the kind of moist, dark, damp air of the Stygian worlds below. It is this sort of horrible substance that has more to do with Hades. And that is a very depressing element. And it is literally the element of melancholy, the humour of melancholy, which is the black liquid that people used to believe was in our bodies, kind of making us depressed and making us murder each other and things. And it's something you see, though, in the cards of tarot, because if you look down the suit of swords in tarot, you'll notice that it's really bipolar. It goes from being pure intellect to this horrific, oh my god, everything's finishing, oh my god, everyone's dying. It goes from being these cards of like really sort of intelligent, like these cards like, the Six of Swords, which is all about finding the right solution to the right problem and all that stuff, to then you've got the one where the guy is sitting up in bed with his duvet, and you've got all the kind of swords above him. That looks really bleak. And there's another one, I can't remember which number it is, but it looks like something out of, a movie by some Scandinavian director. It's a guy, blindfold on the beach with swords sticking in him and stuff. Is it the Two of Swords?
Two of Swords up there.
Oh my god, there we go, that's brilliant. And this is one important thing to understand as we go through the Tree of Life, specifically with the air cards, that whereas all of the others, I'll be asking you to imagine the personality of this fictitious element, and then to put it in a situation. Whoever I give air must remember how bipolar it is. When things are good, air is a pure element of kind of intellect, but when things are bad, everything is doomed, and everything is terrible. And that is really, that's one of my geekiest things in tarot, to be honest. It's kind of a thing I really, really find very interesting about that one suit.
It is very much.
It's very flippy. And basically what it means is I can go back and I can tell you what books those people were reading when they wrote these things. Because that's all from a guy called Empedocles. But yeah, no, exactly. And that's what the Yetzirah is. Now, we're at our final word, and in a second I will ask you all to kind of clear the table except for your little 10 piles of cards, and we will start. But before we do that, the final word, Axilla. Axilla is the material world. I mean, there's only one suit really left for it to be, the suit of discs. Sorry? In my opinion, it is A-S-S-I-A-H. Now, this is the material world. it isn't the physical world as we see it. It's always very much stressed that the physical world we see